Hello and welcome to It's Personal Stories. My name is Lan Elliott on behalf of It's Personal Stories. And today I'm really pleased to have Baron Amu on with us. And Baron and I have known about each other for many years, but we haven't really had a lot of in-depth conversation. So I'm really excited to do that today. So welcome, Baron.
Thank you, Lan. Thank you for having me. It's really a privilege.
Absolutely. Thrilled to have you on. And you have had an amazing career so far. You're not done yet, but you've lived and worked in 5 countries on 3 different continents. Could you share some of the inflection points of your career and if there was a factor that you think was important in your success?
I mean, I think there's a couple of inflection points, even before my career started, which was sort of the curiosity to kind of travel abroad and see the broader world. Living in Hawaii, growing up in Hawaii and being a native Hawaiian, it's sort of the island mentality, right? Where it's a village and you kind of take care of everybody else and you get to, it's very comfortable and frankly very welcoming. But then when you get sort of you watch television and you see some people who do come from overseas and the visitors, the tourists and things like that, which got me back into hospitality actually was the whole reason. You start to kind of be curious about the world itself. And so at 16, I actually traveled to Japan, and then started sort of my journey. At 18, went to university in San Francisco, and then just started traveling from that point on, seeing the world, Boston, Spain, Ithaca, New York, and then really traveling around the world for my career. And I think some of those inflection points were sort of getting out of my bubble, getting out of my comfort zone, and taking the risk of going to a country that I don't speak the language, right? And actually for 9 of the last, call it 20 years, I've lived in a country that I don't even speak the language to this day. So that's a bit of a challenge. But I think that it's that having those people, having the ability to do that, and then having the people that support you in that. And any particular factor, I think it's really just the philosophy of knowing that home will always be there, having a set of parents that kind of give you that, but also know that you can be confident in the fact that your skill set, who you are, and frankly how you carry yourself will translate into other cultures and other locations. And so that really was a kind of a marking point for me, if you will.
Yeah, you've definitely taken the path to be overseas for many, many years, and it is incredible to decide to move to a country where you don't speak the language. I moved to Brussels for 3.5 years, where I do speak a little bit of French. I grew up with my parents speaking French at home. And to go to a country actually where I was born and live there for 20 years and not speak the language, but still be able to get around it, it is really very impressive and brave.
It's just, yeah. And I think it builds character as well, right? You sort of get a little ingenious, if you will, or creative, if you will, to get things done and do things. And I think that's where I really always encourage, people in our industry or coming up in through the industry to do those types of things, right? Kind of push themselves. So.
Absolutely. Now, like most people, your path to success to where you are today isn't a straight line. And often we find that we learn a lot from setbacks compared to everything going perfectly according to plan. And I'm curious if you've experienced a setback that taught you an important lesson.
I think there's several, right? And I think, but really the big one has been that sometimes in your failures, I think sometimes it's beyond your control. And so, I think in a couple of instances where actually, I was laid off, right? I was fired, and it wasn't for anything in terms of incompetence, but more along the lines of I wasn't the right guy for the job. So as an example, in 2 situations I was in, a company came in, took over my company that I was working for, installed their person as my supervisor, as my boss, and they basically just wanted their own person in that seat, in my seat. And so there was nothing I could do. I really tried hard. I really pushed myself, tried to meet the deadlines and all of the expectations. And, after a while, I actually had a conversation with HR and some of my, mentors, champions, people that I relied on. And they said, Baron, listen, if this person wants you to leave, they're going to get you to leave. And even HR said, listen, you can fight this, you can go through, some of the legal ramifications of what's happening here, but at the end of the day, it's just not a right fit, and it's nothing that you could have done. So I think that's one of the biggest lessons that it taught me was, in through that failure, sometimes you self-reflect and sort of beat yourself up about it, but at some point, it's also time to move on, and you realize maybe there's nothing more I could have done. So it is a learning experience, something that I think, I've taken through the rest of my life, and actually has sort of created that, that barrier of, I got to work harder. If somebody asks me a question, I can't just answer that question. Maybe I have to, try to figure out what the next question will be, right? Just sort of pushing myself to keep going beyond what is just being asked of me.
That is a tough thing to know that you're probably doing a good job before there was this change, but it's nothing really about you. And it is a lesson you learn along the way that sometimes it's really not personal. It's really not about you. It's about the bigger picture. They're just looking for something different, or maybe they have someone specific in mind.
And 100%, because I think, Lena, it was the fact that, it just by putting his own person into the chair that I'm sitting in, it just expedites things that he needs to do, his objectives and goals that he's made promises to his supervisor, his board, whatever you want to say. But it was really, it's heartbreaking, especially when you work so hard and sort of get surprised by the fact that, you are no longer being employed by this company that you've given your life to for a certain amount of time. I think that's, and we all take it sort of personally, right? I hope. I mean, it's sort of self-reflection, but it is, a lesson learned, and frankly has created the person who I am. So I can't really, doubt it, right? I can't really fight it. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. You touched on it a little bit tangentially, but I wanted to get into imposter syndrome, because that is definitely one of those things, the things that go on in your head, the stories you tell yourself, and often we're our own biggest critics. And that noise can make us doubt ourselves. And I'm sure you've been in a situation like you were talking about, and the self-reflection can then move into rumination, where you start having this cycle. And I'm curious how you handle imposter syndrome today.
Well, I think those of us who sort of come from the bottom, right? And what I mean by that is really just sort of, started out, hospitality does not really have a straight and clear path, right? I mean, I think everybody wants to be a general manager when you start out in operations, but there's no clear path as to how you get there, right? You don't get a degree in general managers and then you become the GM. It really is about finding your own path. And so when you look at how far I've come, right? And then you sit in front of 350 people, all who are making, capital markets, institutional investors, private equity, who are listening to every word you're saying and potentially turning markets and making investment decisions based on that. You reflect back on the fact that I started as a valet. I was a kid who, didn't put on shoes until I was like 6 or 7 years old, because I would run around barefoot or in flip-flops most of the time. And from where I've come from, right, all the way to where I am now, you always kind of think about, why are they listening to me, right? Like, what's the big deal? What do I have to say that nobody else has said? But I think, going around that whole narrative, you also have to recognize the work that you've put in, and frankly, the work that a lot of people have put into you to make sure that you're successful. And I don't think that that's where the confidence really comes from. And that's where you kind of put the noise behind you, like you said, or just I guess I'll call it noise. And you think about the fact that you've prepared for this moment, you've done your research, you have the experience, the gray hair to show it, all of these things. And you make that sort of call to say, listen, I'm going to make the right decision. I know I'm doing what I think is the best thing, and my comments will be fair and unbiased. And it's basically what I think and what I believe. And those can be challenged, but at the end of the day, the facts will matter. And, I've been proud of the fact that I've been able to keep that sort of reputation of being kind of fair and honest. I mean, many times, I've come across very difficult decisions, terminating friends of mine, terminating people that I brought into the position. And again, based on nothing other than the fact that it was probably best for the business, and not anything personal. And to your point, other people took it personally, right? And unfortunately, some of them have not, I no longer have a relationship with them. So that's difficult. But I think imposter syndrome can quickly fade behind the fact that you are doing what you think is right and you have a belief in it. And so just understanding that all the work that you put in has led up to this point. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, but just understand that what you say comes from a voice of reason and fact and experience.
Love that. You had mentioned a bit about moving and living in a country where you don't speak the language after 20 years. But picking up your family and moving to 5 different countries, different continents, that comes with a lot of risk, not just for you, but with your entire family. And I'm curious how you approach risk. How do you think about taking a big risk, either for your business or for you and your family?
I think it's all about the data. Obviously, you can only benchmark so much, and then you have to go with some kind of intuition or leadership thought, right? I mean, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it does give you a good roadmap to what might happen, right? Probability. When we came out here to Vietnam, it was a family decision to a certain point, but I also felt like the back end of that was what is the worst case scenario? What is our contingency plan if it doesn't work out? And again, it goes back to the fact that our families supported the move. They were obviously a little skeptical, but they knew that at heart of hearts, everybody would do what was right for the family. And if it didn't work out, we could easily call back, for us to come back. And I think that's one of the lessons learned was, understanding what the risk you're taking, the reward that you have from that risk, and then preparing yourself for that kind of, risk reward scenario, right? And being able to kind of contingency plan that. It's hard to really quantify exactly what that risk will be, especially when you're coming to emerging markets. But the reward has been significant. The challenges have been different, but at the end of the day, a lot of people, when you're doing these kind of risk-taking scenarios, it's normally out on the edge or on the frontier of the spectrum, and then there's not a lot of precedent, right? So then you're basically, people will say, oh, you failed and on this and the other. Maybe somebody has a better opinion or option that I didn't think about. But at the end of the day, it was your choice, and people should be able to kind of just either celebrate or hopefully learn from the risks that I've taken, right? So that's. But I always tell the people that I've mentored is moving to another country, not speaking the language, and just following something of a company or a position that you really thought was interesting. Several stories, both me personally and also proteges, mentees of mine, have done that, and I can't tell you how successful they have or how rewarding it's been to them. Whether it's how you measure success is both personal and professional. So I think rewarding maybe is the better word for that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if you don't take those big leaps, you're not going to have those opportunities. And looking at what's next, what could be, and thinking about, well, if I don't do this, I'll never have that opportunity. And I've heard that people often regret more the things they didn't do than the things that they did do that didn't turn out the way they hoped. So
yeah, I know that you said that a lot of the questions that you get is how do I get from operations to investment, right? And mm-hmm. That's one of the big questions that a lot of the people ask me. And I can tell you that I think it was being on the fringe, taking those risks, taking a role that maybe I wasn't 100% ready for, but I did work my tail off to try and understand what that role was, right? And to be honest, with AI now and the internet, even I was working before the internet. Now researching and getting data is much easier than the times when I had it, when you had to buy a book or rent it from the library or go talk to have coffee chats with people. Now that information is readily available, so you can kind of de-risk your decisions a little bit, or take those roles on. But it is about being kind of out on the edge. And honestly, if it weren't for the country of Vietnam, I'm not sure I would still be in investment, right? Because of the fact that it gave me a great foundation because the market was also, from an investment perspective, relatively young. So I learned all the basics from not just the private equity, institutional investor, high net worth individual family side, but also from the government side in terms of what are the regulations and laws that are applied to these types of investments and the structures that they present. it was really interesting, right? And so it gave me a great foundation such that when I went back to the United States and did something similar, I asked these questions that some of the private equity guys never asked themselves because they didn't understand how the structure was, right? It's so compartmentalized, and I'm doing this part of the fund, you do that part, I do this part, but I looked at it holistically because frankly, we had to at that point. So it was very interesting in how, working in an emerging market made me potentially better prepared for working in sort of developed countries.
I do think being in an emerging market also gives you the opportunity to be the front runner, to discover new things, to become the expert because no one else has been there doing it. But it can also give you many more opportunities that maybe wouldn't exist if it was a very developed market and there were a lot of people with your kind of skills in that market already. And so I love that call out of taking the risk to be in an emerging market, giving you the opportunities that you might not have, for example, if you'd stayed working in New York.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And it has been a blessing, right? I mean, it really has allowed me to kind of complement my skill set and allow me to do things that maybe I wouldn't have done, right, if I were just sort of specialized in New York. So
absolutely. One of our other guests, Scott Berman, mentioned that exact path to developing a niche for himself when he moved to Florida and became the expert because nobody else knew. He built it himself and he was the expert. He was first there. So I applaud you for going into a new market and figuring it out.
Back in 2007, when we started out on this journey of a hospitality fund, private equity hospitality fund, we would go to these hospitality investment conferences around the region, which was still sort of nascent. I think it was probably 10 years in, 15 years in, no more than that. These conferences were going on, whereas in the U.S. they've been going on now for 40 plus years. We would have this Vietnam panel, and there were several conferences that would have Vietnam panels, but it would all be the same group of people going. The before panelists, all of us are the same. Two of us are competitors, and two of them are either a consultant that we use or an attorney that we use, right, or an accountant that we use. So all of them would be the same people, which then allows you to kind of develop that sort of expertise, if you will, because you're using some of the best, and we are out in front in terms of understanding the law and even helping with the regulation. So
I love that. You had alluded to being put in roles maybe you didn't feel like you were ready for them. And that often comes from having mentors or champions who advocate for you when you're not in the room. How important is it to find mentors and champions, and how does one go about it? How have you managed to do it?
I think, there obviously it starts with your parents, your family, your kind of core around you that gives you the confidence to go on and move it forward. Now, there are times where, I distinctly remember when my father said, I don't want you traveling to Spain because, what happens if something happens to you? I mean, I was 20 years old or something like that. And I tugged at my emotions because, my father is my idol and my champion. And he told me I shouldn't go. And I said, I really want to go. I just want to figure out what's out there and see it. And, ironically, this was probably a month before I was going to go. I bought my own ticket. I was ready to go. And then a week before, he called me and said, listen, I was wrong. I support you, and I just want what's best for you. I'm just trying to keep you safe. But if you want to go to Spain, and you know it better than I do because he grew up on a little island in the middle of the ocean, he's like, go ahead. Right. And so those types of ways, it's not just a one-way kind of championship, right? I mean, it's just actually learning from each other and knowing that that person has your best interest in mind, right? Even if it's a tough conversation. So how you identify those people is they sort of just kind of float to the top. They're willing to take a coffee or a chat with you. As an example, at Cornell University, where I got my master's, one of the classes I had to take was food and beverage, right? And as you know, there's a restaurant night where the class actually runs the restaurant. And I had no interest in food and beverage. To this day, I really have no interest in food, other than from the finance side, right? I have to know it, but operations had no interest in it. And so the professor that I had was tough. I mean, he was tough on me. He was German, and he really just, kind of beat us up. Ironically, he's one of my best friends today. In fact, the person that I go and stay with when I go back to Ithaca, and we've become very tight. He's one of my mentors now, just because he has a different view of life, right? And he's a wonderful man. family man, everything, right? And also self-made, everything that you want to, you want from a I guess a mentor, a champion of yourself. But he was, I mean, he was one of those people who sort of came out of nowhere, right? And became someone that you could really call upon for those tough, difficult decisions, both personally and professionally. And I think that's the other thing. I think you don't have to have one to be both, right? If you know what I mean. You don't have to have one person to be both personal and professional. You can have a professional mentor, you can have a personal mentor, and you don't, go between those two. Sometimes you need those both parties to be separate because those decisions are quite different. So what I can tell you is that it's invaluable. They'll come out of nowhere. They'll probably come through both work and personal lives. The people that stood around me for most of my life, and I would call my sort of close circle, are probably people I've known for 40 plus years, right? I mean, the guys that I grew up with, everyone from a guy who I met when I was 4 years old to a guy that I met when I was 10 years old to 13 years old. But all of those guys are people that I could call upon and be, and I think also from a professional standpoint, whether my professional life, when you're high flying and charging the way we do, they also give you kind of the grounding of, okay, listen, should you be going to Vietnam right now? You're having your second child, all of these things, right? It's a tough decision, but actually they supported me on that, right? They gave me their opinion, but supported me regardless. So.
I wanted to pull out two things that you said there. The first one is around finding a mentor in someone that maybe was very difficult when you were taking class with them, your professor that you mentioned. How do you turn that into mentorship? And then the other part of it is you mentioned asking people to coffee. That takes a certain amount of vulnerability to go and ask someone more senior to you to spend time with you. And I'm just curious about the process of turning someone into a mentor.
I think it's much easier than when you and I are growing up, Lon. I hate to sound like the old guy, right, in the room, but I mean, the email and the messaging and everything else just allows you more points of contact that can be, that can turn into actually a conversation, right? Back in the old days, you'd have to pick up the phone, make an appointment, maybe even try to be slick and cross paths with them at the coffee shop or wherever they were, wherever their car was parked, right? That kind of thing, and almost stalking, I guess you could say. But I think that there was something in terms of being kind of fastidious about the people that you really like, or maybe bring something to the table. With my professor, it was really interesting because you get the sense that he was pushing you for a reason. And again, people like you and I are natural mentors. I think he's one of those as well, where he just has this sort of aura about him. Some people are made for mentoring, some people are not. And I think that's also an important thing. Don't force yourself into a role where you think, this person is in the position that I really want, or is doing something that's really cool. Some of them are not great mentors, right? As you know, in sports, right? Oftentimes they say the players don't often make good coaches. And I think it's the same professionally, right? Somebody who's doing the job maybe is not the best person to coach you on how to do the job. So I think there's something to be said for that. But I really feel like, if you just believe that most people have an altruistic sense in some way, shape, or form, that if you ask them, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee because I'm really interested in what you want to do, these informational sessions, if you will, that in itself will tell you whether or not there's an interest in really sharing with you. Again, if it's something that you're very interested in, I would look at maybe doing it 2 or 3 times to try and reach out. But on the other hand, if there's another role that you want to kind of pursue or do something, and that person is not, that one person that you targeted is not open to it, I think you do have to move on, right? It's one of those things. But it's come sort of organically for me. I've been lucky, and frankly, a lot of them have come from just a long background and history of, again, your reputation is built over time. And I think you see it from both sides, right? You see this person who's constantly been giving you advice or even sharing things with you. And then on the other hand, you have been an upstanding person with them. They can see who you've been and how you've even personally grown up. It shows kind of the track you have. And again, it's basically representing your own brand, because the brand, your personal brand, and I don't want to sound like some kind of, heretic or something like that, but your own personal brand has value too. and you want to make sure that that's expressed appropriately, because that's what leads you into these conversations with both mentors and mentees, because they see that.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to shift over to when you're a leader, because building high performing teams is an important part of leadership, and you've had to do that a number of times. I'm curious how you approach that, either from when you're starting from scratch or when you inherit an existing team. What do you look for when you're talking to people on your team? Is there some characteristic that you're searching for or interviewing a potential candidate?
I think there's, when you're talking about, leadership in high performing teams, right? Normally someone is putting that team together, either yourself or someone else, for a goal, right? Or an objective, right? So, taking a step back and saying, okay, is everybody in the right seat in the bus? Are we all going the same way? Are these the right people, right? And we mentioned the fact that sometimes, people want to put their own people on the bus, right? Because it just makes the bus go faster, right? So that's always, kind of in the back of my mind. But I think really, what I like to see in someone is just an attitude of kind of grit, I guess. As people say, I think one of the TED Talks, the most famous TED Talks, is about, what makes one child or one student more successful than another. And really what they boiled it down to quantifiably is grit, whether they can actually kind of survive through some of the difficult times, get through some of those times. And, you mentioned about, overcoming setbacks and things like that. I went to a very kind of high flying private school in Hawaii, the one that the former president went to. So, I was in similar role in terms of, a little bit outside of my comfort zone. It was known to be a white missionary school. And here are these brown kids there. So it was really interesting to kind of fit in there. But then when you went outside the gates of the school, actually more people looked like me than inside the gates. And so it was a really interesting dichotomy of learning how to work in teams and creating teams and leadership skills, right? So if I had to say anything about, back to the leadership role, is, quantifiably, I'll look at the timeline, the project, the goals that are set, and then figuring out whether all the right people are on the bus. But if you're looking for sort of one or two items, one is grit, right? Is probably a skill that very difficult to measure, but also you can see. And I think the second thing is just willing to learn, a willingness to learn, a willingness to adapt, and a willingness to kind of understand other people's point of view. I don't want them to be, jellyfish either with no backbone, but I do want them to kind of be able to absorb somebody else's opinion, yet be able to still set their own opinion, right? And then understanding that the leader of that group or that team or the objective will make the decision what they think is best for that goal, right? And that's the important thing, right? And we may not all agree that this is the right decision, but at some point people have to kind of, as you said, let it go and let it run its course, right? And I run into a lot of people who oftentimes take these decisions very personally. I used to do that as well, another learning point for me. But you have to remember that, in business, most of the time, it's not personal. Most of the time, I will tell you. But it's more about what they think is right for the company or the group. So that's where I would say, basically grit and a willingness to learn and adapt.
Those are great skills that you can take to almost any role. And that's incredible. Thank you. One of our favorite questions on It's Personal Stories is, what advice would you give to your younger self? And I'm curious, 22-year-old Baron, I didn't know you then, but what would you want 22-year-old Baron to know?
It's sort of wrapped up in what I've been talking about, which is, failure is actually inevitable, right? Sometimes you're going to fail no matter what you do, right? And maybe you're not set up for failure. Maybe you thought actually, the hardest ones to take is actually you thought it was an easy win or an easy victory and it was a failure. Those are probably the most difficult ones to take when, and again, you go back and you reflect on what more could I have done? What could I have done personally to be? And in some cases, there's not more you can do. In other cases, there was, right? And then you have to learn from those. But, knowing my 22-year-old self, I remember going to a job interview in San Francisco and, being surrounded by some very high-flying people, people from Stanford and Berkeley and UCLA. And I was just a small kid from the University of San Francisco. And looking around the room, thinking about, wow, how did I get here? Like, what is this? And I'm not ready for this. But What I didn't think about when I was 22 years old was the fact that somebody on, within that company that put us all in that room thought I was good enough, right? Like thought I could compete with these people. And so oftentimes I'm looking at, oh gosh, imposter syndrome, here we go again. I'm not really good. What did they see in me? But in fact, somebody saw something in me and put me in that room. So I thought that was kind of interesting, right? There's two sides to every coin. And for my 22-year-old self is saying, listen, failure is going to happen, move on, and just keep trying hard, right? Just keep your nose, because doors will open up, things will happen, and maybe even fate takes a play in what you're going to do, which I think has a lot to do with my career as well.
So back to resilience and grit. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Baron, you've given us a lot of really fabulous advice, and I love the perspective of someone who has moved countries and continents multiple times. Do you have one final nugget of advice for our audience who are looking to advance their careers?
So I've always tried to live my life within two sort of mantras, right? One is, and I take it from a very close friend of mine. One is to be a leaf. He calls it be a leaf, which is, the leaf goes where the wind blows it, but it never really falls far from the tree. And it always has the DNA of that original tree that he was attached to, he or she, I should say, was attached to. But then it also plants its own roots, right? And then grows from that, right? But never really losing the DNA that it has. So I guess my point there is that you want to be a leaf and just kind of go where the wind blows. You don't, if an opportunity presents itself, maybe don't overthink it. Think about what, the potential advantages are. And if you're even remotely interested, just try it. The thing you lose is time. And as I get older, I know that that's more valuable than anything. But I also think as a younger person, you have that opportunity, right? You don't have a family maybe, or you don't have those responsibilities at home. So if it does not work out, the only person that maybe pays for it is you, right? And then I think the second thing that I would say is you want to be, sometimes sort of similarly, you have to look at it and go, you know what? Why not? Right? Why not do it? Why not try it? And maybe I don't know everything. Coming to Vietnam in 2004, traveling to Japan in 1983, going to a small island off the coast of Guam in 1995, I believe it was. All of those are to say that, did I know a lot? Did I know exactly what I was getting involved in? No. Could I've done a little more research? Maybe. But the people that put me in that role or that opportunity had some kind of faith in me, saw something in me. And so I think you have to reflect on that and go, it's a lot of pressure and maybe a little bit of risk, but you do have to say, okay, if they think I can do it, I think I can do it, right?
I love that. It's a wonderful way to end our conversation. Baron, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom. I really enjoy hearing your perspective, and it's so different because you've been in so many different situations in different countries. So thank you so much, Baron. I appreciate you being here.
Well, Lynn, and thank you for giving us the platform. I know that, the acronym DEI is now, under attack, you could say, being changed, but I really appreciate you standing steadfast and continuing to kind of support those of us who are coming up from a different way and really allowing us to tell our story. So thank you, truly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And for our audience, if you would like to see more interviews with hospitality industry leaders like Baron, I hope you'll go to our website.